Alex and I, my esteemed friend and former colleague, have been playing old games, and this month, or these last few weeks, we've been playing Max Payne, the original Max Payne from 2001. Max Payne, we both played it and completed it. It's not a particularly long game, which was good. HowLongToBeat.com said it was 10 hours, and I think that is around the time that it did take us. At least me, it did.
I suppose the way I want to attack this today is that I have sort of 4 questions that I'd like us to discuss, right?
Uh-huh.
The first one is identify like the elevator pitch, like what is Max Payne, the original game, in terms of what is the formula, and then subsequently how well it's realized. And then the next question that I want to attack is, if you or I were the creative director of Max Payne, what would we have done differently and why? And then the other 2 is like tangential, I suppose, how well it aged and what's the ultimate like verdict within like the tier list context. Max Payne, right. A third-person cinematic shooter that follows the story of this undercover police detective that is trying to take down like the mafia syndicate. And then there's a unique selling point with the bullet time mechanic. I think that's basically it, in a sense that it doesn't look like this game is trying to be much more than that.
Yeah, I think the entirety of Max Payne really has to be thought about in the context of The Matrix, because because first of all, I bought this game when it came out, and I completed it when it came out, and I remember The Matrix came out in 1999, and then Max Payne came out 2 years later, which is actually a reasonable amount of time between that film and The Matrix. And without the slow-mo bullet time, and without the sort of, somewhat long trench coat, etc., stylistic choices that they made. I mean, there's even a point where they do basically the lobby scene from The Matrix, right? Which is later on in the game, which you'll have played recently, right? Without that, I don't know whether it would have just potentially been just a fairly generic third-person shooter. The story is plays quite a large part in it, and the influences from the story play quite a large part in it. If you know anything about the trivia, you'll know that Sam Lake is the protagonist. Sam Lake, who's the writer for Remedy, is also lends his likeness to Max Payne. So basically, Max Payne is the writer of Max Payne. Right? Yeah. And you can see his influences in Max Payne as well, mostly being stuff that's sort of like Twin Peaks references and things like that. There's a really big Twin Peaks reference in there.
That's where I always end up anyway. Only it's not me talking to the pink flamingo, but someone who looks the part down to the finest detail.
And then I think I think a lot of Max Payne stuff is just like you said, the elevator pitch is Sam Lake's idea of the sort of, the noir cop with these elements of the surreal that come from shows like Twin Peaks. So I feel like that's where they were coming from originally. It was just the idea of doing a third-person action shooter. And I think, without the slow-mo. Although, having said that, it did look really good for the time. I remember it looking very good for the time as well.
I wonder, how did you get on with Chapter 1, which is, I guess, the prologue / the Act 1 of the game?
So I think, first of all, like a lot of games that are older, it feels very hard. The mouse sensitivity is like through the roof, right? Through the roof, right? And see, I don't know about you, but I think I put it down to the minimum. First of all, that's the thing about the way mice used to work then, and the sensitivity settings of them all. because I remember it being I don't remember it being like that when I played it back in 2001.
Probably also has to do with the resolution being a lot greater now than it was.
Yeah, perhaps, and it's the way the way it moves across the screen and stuff like that. Not using rollerball mice anymore. Everything's laser. So I found that part that was the part I found hard, and I think one of the other things that I found about it that I think is just something that you forget about playing games like that is that you can save a lot, and it's okay to do that because it's not. Nowadays you might think of that as being scum saving, but really it's not really. I mean, towards the end, I got kind of good at understanding how the enemy AI works and just circling around them, around the back, even without slow-mo on, and killing them fairly easily.
I thought that the game had very slow starts. I think that I was really quite bored throughout most of the Act 1 or Chapter 1 because it just felt like everything's the same. Even though technically you go from underground into a hotel into somewhere else. But it kind of felt like very similar. Just the environment.
Did you feel the levels were quite samey?
I did feel that a lot, yes. I think also because at the beginning of the game, you don't get a lot of weapons.
That's right.
And you don't get a lot of different enemies as well.
Yeah.
You build up on all of that to basically throughout the end of the first chapter and the second chapter, they introduce a lot more different weapons and enemies and just encounters. The way encounters are structured as well. I realized at some point that I'm actually enjoying it quite more. And funnily enough, because yesterday I had to binge it, probably at least 40% of the game, which took me probably 4 or 5 hours total. Coming back from Thief, I don't see myself playing Thief Gold for 3 hours straight. That would have been way too taxing.
Yeah, that would have been.
Which was an interesting realization.
Quite a lot, too much, maybe. I was going to say about the lack of work. One of the things I noticed, one of the things that's kind of frustrating, is the way the bullet time works. At least the way the slow mo works, especially when you do normal, because there's the 2 modes, right? You've got shoot dodge, which is basically hit the right mouse button with a direction key and you go in one direction, and then once that dodge is over it goes back to normal time. Or you've just got the hit the slow-mo button and everything goes slow-mo, right? The shoot dodge I found quite frustrating, especially when you use the pump action shotgun, because it's so slow, right? Or really it doesn't actually matter whether it's a shotgun, but it's just if you hit the shoot dodge and you you're sliding one way and then you're killing enemies, if you don't kill all of the enemies, right, while it's still in slow-mo, it suddenly goes back to real time. You can get just killed instantly because it just goes whoop, straight back, and you're not prepared for it. You're not really ready for it. And then you just end up missing your shots or whatever, or they just shoot you really quickly and that's it. But even sometimes actually during slow-mo, there are a lot of points where they just look like they just kind of like they cheated, but they didn't cheat really. They just hit you at the right time.
And that segues very well into what I was thinking, because if you take the bullet time out, and I know that you could technically rebalance the numbers, how many damage it dealt and everything, although you can't really do much with AI. But I was thinking how if you take the bullet time out, the game is not very playable because you just get fucked. Because a lot of the time, and especially you mentioned a few minutes ago about scam saving, I was just saving in every room and sometimes multiple times within a room, because a lot of the time, let's say there's the corridor turns and enemies are waiting for you, and so I could sort of twist the camera and I can see the enemies are there and they're ready. So if I just run out, I'm dead. I'm just get face full of lead and that's it. So the only way is to slow-mo dive sideways and shoot them. And that's like, for me, and it's interesting if you didn't have that, but for me, probably every other room was like that. And it's even worse with doors because you can open the door, but then it will close back, and so you can't really carefully take them out. You have to barge in and then hope for the best.
I wonder if that was a deliberate design decision, because there was one moment actually when you talk about the doors where there was a guy, it was later on in the game, there was a guy at the other end of a long room. And so I was like, okay, I'll just use like the sniper rifle on him or something. But then you want to open the door, and you maybe want to like activate the sniper scope and peek around and then quickly take the shot at him. But you can't do that because the door will instantly close back in your face as soon as you get like slightly further behind it. So you then have to make the decision, well, I've got to either try and like just do it really quickly, or just barge in the door and then dodge around him, or then go into slow-mo and then put the sniper scope in, which goes in slow-mo anyway if you hit them.
The worst one for me with the door specifically was, I think it was towards the end of the second act or in the early stages of Act 3, when there's basically a kitchen and then there's a door, and on the other side of the door, 3 people, and they're hiding behind some sort of countertop.
Right, I think I remember.
And I must have died like dozens of times because as soon as you open the door, you get face full of lead, and you can't really jump sideways because of how the level design is. If you activate slow-mo and run in, you run into them like at first, and you can't really maneuver around much.
Yeah.
So I think in moments like these, I basically relied on grenades heavily.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you have grenades, like, that's usually the thing that does it, that makes it work. But
all right, so in closing in on the original question of, like, given what this game is trying to be, how well is it realized? And I think that fundamentally, my problem is if you take the bullet time out, it's actually not very playable.
And I do agree. I think that without the bullet time, it would be a reasonably generic shooter. Apart from the fact that actually it would have been reasonably competent, I guess, and it looks good for the time. But I actually think that perhaps the designers would have been, if it didn't have the bullet time, it would have had a different level design and different timings on enemy attacks and things like that. Which would probably make it even more of a generic third-person shooter, to be honest, if it wasn't that fast in real time, because it is fast in real time. So, but like I said before, you can sort of, or at least I could later on in the game, I was sort of running around enemies somewhat easily. This lobby scene here, elevator scene here, and then I'm still on full health. It's fine. But it is super fast, and it does make it a bit weird. But without the slow-mo, it wouldn't have even. I don't think it would have made it half a dent on people. And I also think that and that's also because of the Matrix as well, which had a big influence on it, on the whole slow-mo thing. It's like, I want to play. Everybody wanted to play a slow-mo game.
Setting, I was surprised to find that somebody had been passing time reading. The paperback was entitled The Age of Murder and Storm. The blurb on the back mentioned Norse mythos and Ragnarok, the end of a Viking world with a terrible winter that covered the earth in ice, when vile crimes were rampant and all humanity lost. I could see how somebody impressionable might get it into their head that we were at the end of time. I was also beginning to see what the nightclub and its owner were all about.
I was just going to say, coming back from, again, talking about Thief, at the end of chapter 1, when we go to the Ragnarok club.
Yeah, the club, yeah.
And there's all these occult references. I was like, not again. I was like, no way, is this gonna become like a Supernatural episode now, like the show Supernatural, or the X-Files episode now? Is that really what's like? I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah,
I mean, it didn't.
So yeah, that comes. So a part of that comes back to some of the the stuff that Sam Lake's into, right? The sort of surrealist nature of it, which I did think about Thief when some of that stuff happened. But I think there's a couple of things going on there. One is that there's the kind of surrealist stuff that clearly he's into, such as Twin Peaks is a big example, right? The biggest reference to Twin Peaks being if you, I don't know whether you've watched the show, but there's the Red Room at the end of season 1. It's a bonkers TV series, right? Proper Lynch stuff. Obviously, it's made by him. And there's like a TV showing. There's a TV playing an episode of something in one of the rooms in chapter 1, I think. And it's the Red Room. It's got lots of red curtains, and there's people speaking backwards and stuff. And so it kind of feeds into that surrealism, like the same way the dream stuff does at the very end of chapter 1, right after the Ragnarok Club, and then after chapter 2. But I didn't think fortunately it didn't go sort of full fantasy sci-fi, in the same way that Thief did, where it kind of, you thought it was a medieval thieving game that was somewhat grounded in reality, and actually it wasn't. I don't think it wasn't so much. I think there's also, there's a lot of stuff that relates to drug use as well, because obviously the whole thing about being Valkyr, the Valkyr drug, that helps to support the narrative. And I also think, it's just a trend of the times. But sometimes Max Payne calls itself out on that stuff. So there's a bit, for example, right near the end, where he goes to see Woden. I think it's Alfred Woden, and it's like the sort of the guy who's like, hey, come and meet me in this mansion.
Oh yeah.
Whatever. And he meets him, and it's kind of like an Illuminati sort of meeting with all those top guys. Yeah. And I was like, oh man, like, and I literally in my head I was thinking, Jesus, like the guys who wrote Max Payne, they've been watching too many X-Files, right? And then Max Payne literally says that line, right? Like, yeah. He goes, because Woden explains the situation to him about the Valkyr drug, like the government using it for testing, and Max Payne was like, "You guys have been watching too much X-Files." That was brilliant. It was almost self-referential.
There's fourth wall breaking at the end when he gets dosed for the second time, and he's like, "Oh, Max Payne, you're in a video game."
Yes, so that's another one. That's another great one as well, where he says you're in a comic book strip, which I actually thought was good. I think I don't know. I'm not sure exactly the reasons why they did that, but it's kind of funny that maybe they knew. They knew what the sort of zeitgeist of narrative was then, so they knew that they wanted something similar to what other people were doing at the time, and they knew that would attract a bunch of people, but they also maybe thought it was a bit silly and wanted to self-reference it.
Did you figure out the train jump on your own?
Yes, I did.
You did?
Well, yeah. Okay. I played it before, but then it was a long time ago, but I did figure it out. And I think I made the mistake initially of just trying to actually jump, whereas you're supposed to just kind of run off. And then I think that's what I did anyway, in the end. I can't actually remember.
Well, you need to bullet dive in, basically.
Oh, I don't think I did that.
All right.
I still managed it.
Interesting.
But it did take me actually a few attempts. It's one of those examples in Max Payne, which is something that we're fortunate for these days with modern games. Modern games often give you a lot more, I don't want to say hints, but they highlight stuff a lot more. They give you a lot more UI prompts and things like that, and a lot more highlights, which is another thing I noticed about Max Payne that it really does not do, which is fine.
No.
It's not necessarily a problem. So, for example, just things like, I only realized after mission 2 or 3 that there were certain cabinets that you can open. Didn't even know you could open them.
Yes,
and
you
there's stuff
can.
inside them. And so
sometimes
it wasn't completely clear whether or not you could open a door or not, or you could interact with an object in the world or not, which is also sometimes fine because you want the art style to look consistent and you don't want highlights and things getting in the way of that.
I think what a modern game would do, I think a modern game would have a sequence where a different character or a Max Payne himself would be like, oh, I should check that cabinet. Maybe I can find something in there.
There'd be like a bark.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, they teach you once, and then you're supposed to pick it up.
Yeah, perhaps there'd be some highlight or something. I mean,
Like a diegetic.
He does say stuff about the important story beat stuff, and there is a highlight with the exclamation mark for stuff, but there's nothing in. There's like no UI prompt, you know, for E for open, right? Whatever. None of that.
I just want to express my hatred towards the 2 episodes of when Max Payne is drugged and you're in like this lucid. I really did not like it, especially the first one. Second one was fine because it wasn't like a labyrinth for you to navigate, but the first one, I was running in fucking circles.
Yeah, because you just kept going around and you didn't follow where the baby's crying was coming from.
I tried to follow the sound, but it took me a while. Like, it's not super. I mean, obviously, I don't want to just blame the game and be like, oh, the audio's, is rubbish. I couldn't. But I got lost.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I figured it out by process of elimination, turns that I've taken, crossed them out. What else can I try? So the first part, labyrinth, okay, that maybe is my fault. I, didn't pay attention. But then there's the second part when you're running on these rails.
Yeah.
And the input is kind of like fucked a little bit because you're in this lucid state.
So.
And like it's not super responsive. And I just struggled to stay on the rail.
I will show you. I didn't find the actual, the navigation of the level itself a problem, sort of knowing where to go. When you play in ultra wide, you get this great, like, I'm pretty sure it's much worse than the original.
Oh no.
Because when it's in ultra wide, it's really like the perspective lines are really so close together, and it's really like you're using a super wide angle camera, and so you get these moments like where you're going down these hallways and you can barely see Max. He's just this tiny speck. It's absolutely crazy.
Oh no, this is awful.
I know, like this is absolutely awful, and because obviously it was meant like Thief, like all those games, it was most of the time they're meant to be played in 4:3, and so the engine actually just does or the fix, at least the graphical fix, does compensate for the fact that it's obviously taking like the width of the screen into account when it's adjusting the perspective and the FOV for it. So which is not so bad when you're just running down it's bad when you're running down a corridor, but then when you get to these bits here, it's like, oh my god. And because the controls are so hard to do, and I always thought about switching it to like a different, like the original aspect ratio and trying to do it like that. Like, oh man, I fell off so many times, and I just have to keep, you can see here, I just kept saving because it was just pretty awful. There's also a game called Stranglehold. I don't know whether you remember that, but that was basically a John Woo game, right? Because that's the other thing that's a big influence on Max Payne is the John Woo movies with what most people call him Chow Yun-Fat, but I think it's pronounced Chu Yun-Fa or something. The main guy who's in it. Have you ever seen Hard Boiled or any of those movies? And there's even a point in Max Payne where you have to open a door and you get and it's like pizza delivery. He says, "Oh, I'm pizza delivery." He's like, "Get lost," and he's like, "Okay, I'll go," and he finds that guy. He says, can you open the door for me? And it's before you, it's in chapter 1, I think. And he said, what's the password for the door? And he's like, John. He's like, yeah, come on. And the whole, like, yeah, it's a reference to the John Woo movies.
Open up. Let me in, quick.
Not so fast. The password. John Woo.
Come on. Oh, okay, John Woo.
All right. Come right in.
Something that never really made a lot of sense to me, and before I go into it, I feel like I should make a caveat saying that, generally speaking, I think gameplay comes first and the narrative kind of supports it, or in other ways, you can't really fix bad gameplay with story, basically. However, something that didn't really ever make sense to me with Max Payne is the fact that Max Payne is a detective, a policeman, and yet, basically, you are a Rambo who's leaving a pile of dead bodies behind. But then the character isn't really an ex-military, isn't a super soldier, and it's just never really, like, I just didn't get it. At some point, I just stopped caring, because it's fun flying on slow-mo sideways into the corridor and shooting bad guys. It's fun, but it never really made sense to me. I would have, if someone was to explain me the story of the game, right? You know, a police detective, undercover, cover blown, taking down mafia.
Yeah.
I would have thought of a cover shooter.
Yeah, it is kind of odd that. I mean, I actually did think that the narrative was a little hard to follow at the start because there were a lot of bosses. There were a lot of mafia bosses, and I'm like, he's related to him because who, why, what? And you get told this stuff once, and it's like, fine, whatever, you know. And you know the setup, right? The setup is, or the original, you know, from the setup from his past is that his wife and baby have been murdered. And so, which by the way, is like the first minute and a half of the game, and I was like, "Holy fuck, this going sideways real quick." Yeah, it was quite. I actually think it was quite intense, especially being a parent myself now as well. And like when I played it back in 2001, when I was like in my early 20s, I was like 21. Obviously, it didn't really hit. I was like, okay, cool. But seeing that scene now is actually still quite powerful.
I thought it was quite intense as well.
Yeah, it kind of hits home, and the fact that it was just quite and the voice acting is really good. The guy who did the voice for Max Payne died last year. Actually, he died.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at the end of last year, so not too long ago. But he was a proper voice actor. He was in a bunch of stuff, which is actually quite different from, Thief, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
They didn't really, it's just like the team. I mean, maybe Garrett, I'm not sure. Maybe Garrett sounds more like a proper voice actor, but I'm not actually sure. But even the thugs, right? They're proper voice actors, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And they did a good job on it. And you can tell they lend that sort of gravitas to it.
Bosses, everything all right? Bosses, Joey, Vigilio, you all right in there? They're not answering. Call the others. Tell them to come quick. Okay, but we can't wait for them. We gotta go in now. Bosses, we're coming in.
It's Payne.
But the story it became a little bit confusing. And like you said, I just roll with it because you do roll with these things because it's an action game. And you go like, whatever, I'm here for the ride, right? I'm here for the slow motion gunplay in a way. But I also think that it wouldn't have been as successful if it hadn't had the solid... It does have solid writing in it. But the one thing that struck me is, and I do remember this from playing it years ago, is that Max's vocabulary is quite large for someone who's like a noir detective.
Right.
He is quite he's quite the sort of, he's almost like an erudite scholar, right? He's very poetic when you listen to these monologues.
The night groaned with cold. The garden lights flickered nervously. In their light, the falling snow was dead white before the darkness ate it up. I had heard the stories. The trio were mad dogs. They'd have hung the heads of their enemies over the manor gates if the capo had only let them. Punchinello wanted Payne, he'd see the pain. The trick in my situation was that there was...
that he's pushing out.
Well, I thought that was what Noir was about.
I guess, but he's really. I mean, it's real deep, poetic prose, if that makes sense. Not the kind of thing you expect from a hard-boiled detective, right?
No.
But it makes his character interesting, I guess.
Absolutely.
There's new metaphors everywhere, about New York City or the situation he's in. These real poetic metaphors that he uses, which I thought was interesting. It's kind of cool. And the comic book strip aspect of the storytelling is something that was also quite unique and supports it quite well, supports the whole game quite well. And again, I guess it comes in handy when they do break the fourth wall on that later on in the game. So
I thought it was good.
It was good, yeah, but it was, it played to the cliche, like I said before, it plays to the cliches of the time, government conspiracies.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And and essentially it's really a story of revenge at the end of the day.
Yes.
But I did find it harder to follow. I guess I probably did in the same way as you did, in the back of my mind, somewhat question why he's suddenly on a rampage. But at the same time, because it's a story of revenge, I feel like he was, his partner gets killed, his partner Alex gets killed, right? And then it almost feels like he just went, fuck it, I'll just, just kill everybody now instead.
Yeah, Puck killed, he was framed, and he's like, I might as well just set New York on fire tonight.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Does everything happen within a single night?
That's a good question. Because
at times it seems like it, whilst at other times there's indication that this is not the case. But it is always night.
No, I don't think it can, because there are points where he's talking about the guy's like, meet me at the restaurant at so and so, or like, and then there's all the news stories that must happen on subsequent days and things like that. I don't know. I don't think so. I didn't think that at the time, but it's a really good question. Like, maybe it's supposed to, or maybe it's supposed to be given.
I had a feeling that it was supposed to, and it's always night time.
Yeah, it's always nighttime, because I think that feeds into the theming of it, really.
Noir, detective.
Yeah.
Hell's
Noir,
Kitchen.
literally.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question to you as a game designer.
Okay.
So, third-person shooter, you have like a target dot on the screen. When you are standing, not next to the wall, but let's say 2 meters away from the wall, shooting in the wall, where should bullets hit?
Shooting at the wall from 2 meters away.
Yeah.
I think that, like, you're targeting a piece of the wall and you're shooting next to the wall. I think the player expectation is that the bullet should go where the crosshair is, but obviously in real life you have to aim the guns inwards so they will shoot that way. I think that's what the player expectation would be, is that you should. There's not really a particular reason why it shouldn't, unless you're making a milsim. Really.
Because I've got into arguments with people, because I think that if you have a crosshair, the bullet should go there. Yeah. Because otherwise, how am I aiming?
Yeah.
Whilst some other people thought otherwise, which is why I wanted to ask you. But basically.
Well, from, if you've ever made, I'm assuming you've probably done at least some prototyping or something of some shooters that, you don't, when you program a raycast, right, for a shooter, you take it from the camera position, right? You take it from the camera's center position, and you're just inferring that it's coming from the end of the barrel of the gun, right? You're just inferring that, so there's no reason. Yeah. I don't think as far as I know, I don't know, what was the argument against that? Is it just realism?
Realism.
Why realism, right? Is that fun? There's actually a recent YouTube video been going around. It was after the Half-Life documentary where Gabe Newell is talking about that players don't want don't want realism; they want it to be basically communicated to. So, and he uses the example of I think it was decals on a wall when you fire bullets into a wall. And I think one of the other designers or artists was saying, oh well, but and you have sparks coming off the decals, and maybe someone who was a bit of a gun nut was saying, oh, but that's not very real. And he says, well, it doesn't matter. It's like it's feedback and communication, and that's what's important.
Did you ever wish you were able to take cover playing Max Payne?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And a lot of other stuff, really.
At the end of the game, where you go into this, whatever it is, to go after the bad lady, I think it was second to last mission. There's this sequence where there are 3 people firing rocket launchers. Do you remember that? You
mean right at the end?
Right at the end, yes.
Yes. So I did this quite a few times. Yeah. This was the point where like, oh, this is really hard.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting because they restore your health and painkillers at the start of this level. I struggled a lot in here, and I had to basically take them out with sniper rifle, as it looks like you did as well.
So what I did in the end, I stood right at the back, and they can't hear you.
I did as well.
Yeah, and they can't hear you. And some of them can't see you because their eyes are blocked by a piece of, you can see on this video, right?
By a pillar.
Their eyes are blocked by a pillar. And then I also didn't realize.
How are your bullets, by the way?
They actually take like they actually take usually more than one sniper bullet to kill them. If you hit them in the chest.
Yeah, so that was probably the worst, or at least a tie.
I think it was one of the worst for me as well. Did you find yourself doing well or well enough, but then just reloading anyway because either you wanted to keep more health or conserve ammo, or you just wanted to do the fight cooler, right? Like in a cooler way? Because I did.
I did quite a few reloads so that I could not use painkillers.
Yeah, I did something similar.
Because you get light on those in certain areas.
But I think, the interesting one is for me as well, it's just kind of enjoying the fight, but then just wanting to do it in a cooler way, using slow-mo effectively, or especially if you're using grenades and things like that, using them effectively and not sort of flunking it. And it's kind of that was kind of enjoyable.
Yeah, but for me, it was always trying to preserve my resources.
Yeah.
Because you do get light on resources in this game, I think, or at least, or maybe you don't, but there's a perception that you do. That's how I would phrase it. Yeah,
there were points, I think, during the early stages of the game where I felt like I was running out of ammo a lot, but I think it was sort of sorted towards the end. I was kind of almost disappointed in a way that there was, at least for the jackhammer, you don't get the jackhammer until quite late, and I didn't use it that much. And you it's one of those situations where you're like, oh, should I use it because it's got really limited ammo on it? And I probably didn't use it as much as I wanted to use it, really. It's kind of like one of those abilities in games that you feel like, oh, I should save it up, and then you never use it.
The bullet time, I quite liked the concept and the way it was sort of realized. But what I didn't like is that really it's just the way to handle fights, shootouts in this game, or it was for me. I would use it all the time in every encounter multiple times, and it left me feeling like it wasn't special anymore.
They made it, they designed the game around that. One thing I did wonder about on that point is I wonder whether all of the mechanics for the enemy's AI, for example, and actually the mechanics of the projector, the ballistics themselves, are exactly the same whether you're in slow-mo or real time, or whether they are adjusted in somewhat. Is the AI's aim off? Is the timing different? When you're in slow-mo,
I think the timing,
when you're in real time?
I think the timing becomes different.
Yeah, obviously,
I think the timing becomes different.
Apart from the obvious that they are slower, everything's slower.
And that comes back to the point that I was making before. Enemy waiting for you around the corner. If you walk out of the corner, they hit you like 9 times out of 10 or whatever. And then when I would fly out of the corner, they would sometimes shoot too early. Like they would detect me as if I'm not in slow-mo.
Mm-hmm.
But 100% I picked up on the fact that it kind of throws timing a little bit when it comes to percepting you and then shooting. And then the other thing that I noticed was that it feels, and I may be wrong, but it feels that you are shooting faster than you would normally be able to. I think it's really noticeable with the Colt Commando weapon, like the
Commando, yeah.
The assault rifle.
Yeah, it's
the
got
automatic
quite a
assault
slow
rifle.
rate of fire compared to
Normally, but when in slow-mo, I had a
that's right.
perception that it's almost faster.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Actually, that's a good point. That might be correct. I think one thing about that as well that I was kind of impressed by is I think that both in real time and slow-mo, they're using actual instanced objects for their bullets that have a velocity, because it did feel like sometimes, especially when you go in and out of slow-mo as well while someone's shooting at you, that there is this like little delay, this tiny delay between when you see them shoot and maybe hear the sound. I don't know how the sound is synced up, but when they shoot versus when they actually hit you. And I swear I could have like actually literally dodged a bullet in real time. I swear that might have happened, and I'm not sure. But it was kind of impressive if it was, because, you know, as far as I know, it might have been fairly intensive to do that when lots and lots of bullets are flying everywhere.
Yeah, it must have been. And from a programming standpoint, I think, like, I can't imagine them going in and out of actual bullet objects versus line trace guns when you go in and out of slow-mo. Like, that would have been...
Yeah,
that would have introduced so many.
That's what I wondered about. Yeah, do they swap it from like a straight raycast to like to an actual object? Because yeah, you're right. It'd be weird, because then what happens when they're in the middle of a shot or whatever, or they're like like and how do you do the raycast if there's a delay? Do they literally put a delay on, but then if it's in the middle of the delay when you go into slow-mo, then you've got to spawn an object at the right point in the right yeah exactly. It's kind of weird. I mean, I imagine they use some kind of object pooling or something to make it so they don't literally spawn and they've just got them in a corner of the level somewhere that they just then move, right?
But it's a good point, actually, that you bring up. It is impressive for the time to be able to do that.
They've obviously, like a lot of these things, they probably just limit, you know, the number of people in the encounter at one time and the kind of guns they have. Because the Ingram, for example, the one that's based on the Mac 10s, the pretty fast firing, and then shotguns that fire like a bunch of pellets at once.
And you clearly can see encounters where couple of people run in, you kill them, and then 2 more, and then 2 more, and then like they don't give, which probably also would have been just awful to deal with and completely busted. But yeah, there's probably some performance considerations there as well. 100%. I was thinking about how well Max Payne aged, especially because I did not play this game originally. It's very good that we've played it after having just played Thief. Yeah. Because I think that, you know, the cool thing about it is it aged really quite well because of the systemic elements of its game design. Like rope arrow, like light and darkness, hiding in light and darkness, and like the putting out fire with water arrows, things like that.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff is great.
It worked 25 years ago. It still works now, and it's just as entertaining. Versus Max Payne, I really didn't like during the first few hours until they've introduced more weapons.
Right. Yeah.
And differentiated the encounters.
Yeah.
a little bit.
Is that because you felt the combat was always the same?
Yeah.
Did the combat get dull because you didn't have any other options, essentially?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I can see myself, I can at least entertain the idea of revisiting Thief, because I could play it quite differently, or at least certain aspects of the game I could play differently than how I did originally. But with Max Payne, it's just going to be the same.
And I think, you know what, that's actually, there's also an issue there where that combat feeling the same is as much to do with the differentiation in weapons as it is to do with the differentiation in enemy types as well, and whether the differentiation in weapons supports the idea that you have a tool to do a certain job against a certain enemy, right? Like, you know, it comes under, I guess, like the sort of orthogonal unit differentiation that people like Harvey Smith used to talk about, which is harder to do, I think, in non-fantasy themed or non-science fiction themed, when it's in a more modern setting, because you're just dealing with people, humans. You know, you're not in the original, you know, in a fantasy setting, you can have a tool to deal with a big tanky boss monster. You know, you can have a tool to do splash damage to a bunch of very small little skittering creatures, right? That kind of thing, where you have a bunch of tools, and it's part of the game design and part of your job to choose the right tool for the right job, depending on the encounter. Whereas in Max Payne, it didn't. It was the choice of tool was a lot down to how much ammo do I have for that tool, right? Like, how much of the resources do I have for that tool? There's some exceptions, like the sniper rifle, which is obviously actually good for long distance, but it didn't come in later. And because a lot of the fights is kind of indoors, I didn't find it a huge amount of use, but it was cool.
And also, I found that towards the end of the game, certain weapons almost got...
Yeah.
Basically, the pistols got redundant.
Yep, it became redundant completely. I barely used the double barrel shotgun. I did.
Oh, I've never... Yeah.
I
tried it.
Its use.
I'll explain it to you then.
Because it was faster to fire 2 barrels off than it was to fire 2 shots of a pump action shotgun. So there were certain situations where maybe you could do that, because sometimes an enemy took 2 shots of a shotgun. And so rather than waiting for the next shot, because sometimes that would happen, like you would go into slow-mo, you'd fire a shot off, and then while you're reloading the pump action shotgun, because it was so slow to reload, I mean, when you're in slow-mo,
you would only shoot it once.
He would shoot back at you. He would shoot back at you and hit you. And you might lose a chunk of damage, but then sometimes you might just miss or whatever, and you'd be fine. I was looking for reasons for using a particular weapon, right? And I thought, well, maybe sometimes I think the pistol is more accurate, but really there's not a lot in it, you know? And once you get the Colt Commando, there were reasons to use the dual Ingrams, because they were fast and you could kind of stun lock the enemies.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas sometimes you couldn't do that with the Colt Commando. But, you know, there wasn't like a clear-cut usage case for the weapons, right? Yeah. And I think that's something that the design falls down on somewhat.
And also, so I agree with this point you've made, and it's a very insightful comment that you made about the dual barrel shotgun and how it could potentially be better used for certain situations. But I also think that this isn't that kind of game where you'd be expected to like make those kinds of decisions.
The problem is you can't make that decision unless you, a lot of the times, unless you reload. Not reload the gun, reload the game, because you often don't know what's behind, unless you know the game very well, right? Which is just a case of like sort of playing it by numbers in a way. So, and I found switching weapons as well was just too long. It's not like you can switch weapons quickly.
Yeah, because you need to select the next weapon and then confirm effectively.
Yes,
that was another
thing. That was another thing that actually caught me out a few times, where it would do that, and it wouldn't like register or something, and then I would die.
Yeah.
Right? But it is, yeah, obviously it is harder. Let's say this was let's say, for example, this was a turn-based game, not that it would be, and the enemies had very distinct strengths and weaknesses, and the tools you use to dispatch those enemies had very distinct use cases that fed into the strengths and weaknesses of those enemies. That's a completely different game and a completely different design, you know. But then it wouldn't be Max Payne. It wouldn't be cool slow-mo bullet firing. And I don't think, to be clear, I don't think that every game needs to have an element that is so tightly designed around these sort of very gamified mechanics where everything has to have everything has to have a strength and weakness, and everything has to be sort of really tightly coupled around all this stuff. Not necessarily, because some stuff you do because that feels right, because sometimes it's more immersive to not do that, you know, especially in games that are a little bit more grounded in reality. Real life doesn't have those kind of stats or standards, right? You know, you don't get the general of the army and he's got 1,500 hit points, right? Compared to a guy who's got 100, right? You know? What are you going to put it as?
Yeah, I should have thought about it.
I think I know what I'll put it as. Put it that way.
I think that I'll put it as. I think I will put it as C. And this is because...
A C?
A C.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this is because... But hear me out. And this is because originally, when as in the first few hours, I just didn't care about this game, like, at all. And then towards the Act 2 and then Act 3, it became more entertaining for me, hands down. But I don't see myself revisiting this game.
No, you wouldn't.
Which is where
higher difficulty levels or whatever.
Yes, for my money, I'm glad I played it, but I will not be returning to Max Payne.
No.
Which is where I would struggle to put it above C. Yeah, C for me. What about you?
I would put it A.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would put it A.
Okay.
I mean, I'm blending. I guess when I give it that tier, I'm blending the reception of someone who would play it today and have never played it before, or maybe someone young who's never played games that old before, with someone who's maybe played it, you know, in 2001 for the first time. Because in 2001 for the first time, it was like, you know, S tier, right? It's like, I think 90%, 9 out of 10 reviews. But I'm not going to put it as S. There's a bunch of stuff that I don't really like, mostly the way I actually don't like the way some of the slow-mo works. And a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about, right? Mechanically, doors. And, yeah, so I think I'd put it as A.
Well, and that actually, and when you talked about it, it made me think as well, and that's, I suppose, like, why is replayability is what determines which game is better? Is that?
Well, I think that's all subjective point of view. I mean, that's your bag. I think replayability is really good as well, but...
What, should we call it B then?
Yeah, then call it B. If I say A and you say C, maybe call it B.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed our commentary on Max Payne. And look forward to...
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger.